All right. Welcome everyone to the Cluster Addons meeting. Today is Tuesday, the 8th of December. Do we have anyone who's new on the call who maybe wants to introduce themselves? I think I recognize all the names on the participants list. And we had one action item from last time, just in myself to ping Evan, and he responded to me about the manifest bundle cap, and he said we should merge it now, and if there are small edits to make, we could still make them later on. So that's my update.
And it merged. We followed through.
Applause! Brilliant. Yeah, good things take a little time. Caps especially. Super. Yeah, well done, everyone. All right. Yeah, looking at the agenda, Chris had an agenda item.
Yeah.
Super.
Hey, everybody. Cool. I'll jump into it real quick. So we started a project a little bit ago. We're slow rolling on the beginning of it, but we're in the process of moving over a code base from the multi-tenancy SIGs repo that came out of that multi-tenancy working group called Virtual Cluster. And we're repivoting the actual API definition to be a cluster API provider instead. You'll notice the link that's in the agenda is cluster API provider nested. And we were experimenting, and we kind of wrote a design doc that proposed that we were going to go down this path of using the declarative patterns project and pretty much following what this group has been doing around building add-ons, but specifically to bring up control plane components. And so I really wanted to bring it up to this group. Justin came to our last meeting last Tuesday. Thank you for doing that. But also just wanted to kind of propose a question and just see if there's any special learnings that you all have had from doing this, from building these things, any major problems you've ran into that you found as serious blockers from you being able to progress forward. And yeah, so in essence, what we're going to be doing is bringing up, we're going to in-tree have an etcd provider that will be brought up, or an etcd cluster that'll get brought up as a cluster add-on style. Likely that won't be the most supported piece of the code base. That'll just be so that you can actually use it. The idea is that we'll be replacing you will be able to replace the etcd implementation with whatever you want from like all the prior art around CoreOS's etcd operator, or the one that JetStack worked on for improbable. A lot of different things in that space right now. But the other two components within our stack, because we don't deploy a scheduler, are the API server and the controller manager. And so in essence, we're going to package those up similar. So yeah, so if there's any feedback, if there's things that we shouldn't do up front, I'd love to gather as much of that information as possible before we start building these things.
So I think it sounds to me like the main value add of using the declarative pattern is going to be the ability to translate those cluster specific objects for provider nested into instances of like those templated packages that are linked from the declarative pattern. The packaging format either supports embedding the manifests directly on the file system or loading from channels. So this could be like a very useful thing, or like part of your security model that you would lock down, just depending on who's using it.
Something that we are currently doing, or the way that we currently scoped it out, is to plan each component as separate operators. They'll be packaged into a single controller manager. And so I'm curious if that's something that you all have done in terms of like being a a good idea or a bad idea rather of like, if, for example, to deploy the entire control plane, we need the controller manager and API server together. Should we be packaging those two pieces in your all opinions based on deploying other add-ons in this mechanism together, or does it make it more customizable to be able to separate those two things out? Specifically, we're going to be doing a lot of patching for like the CIDR range that we need these clusters to have. We're going to be changing feature flags, similar to what we do with kubeadm in essence.
Yeah, this is an interesting point. I didn't read the design doc, so I didn't know about this separate packaging suggestion. I foresee, like, you have to ask yourself like what you're winning from that separation of controllers, because you're going to end up with separate custom resources that then need to be like, I mean, each custom resource is probably just going to have the CIDR range copied into it, or you'll have to have some parent object. So then there's just a lot of complexity there as soon as you have a multi-object Kubernetes API. So it's like, are you getting multiple objects because you have, like, these things are not a one-to-one coupling? Do you want to separate the creation of like API servers versus controller managers via RBAC? Probably not. You know, I mean, I guess you could expose different status for each one, which is kind of powerful, but you could also just have different conditions on the same custom resource. I don't know, I certainly could see it going either way. My initial intuition was that there would just be a single object packaged together, because that's the abstraction that you're trying to win, is like, I want to put these numbers in one place and then get emergent behavior from like multiple objects becoming, like, existing because of that. And then also, I mean, the one object allows you to like put a state machine in a single custom resource for like orchestrating control plane upgrades. It's kind of hard. I mean, I would just want to be convinced, like, if what's the benefit of splitting the objects up and then having multiple controllers? Failure modes as well, right? Like, there might be some benefit where it's like, okay, the thing that like makes the controller manager run is like less failure prone, or like it has like a CRD, you know, like fetching or management feature or something in the future, and you don't want that to be like related. Yeah, I don't know.
The idea there is realistically being able to decouple upgrades, so that you could upgrade the API servers before you upgrade, say, for instance, the controller manager, so that we could have, we could be rolling API servers while we're still waiting to roll our controller managers, at least, because it's a pretty limited subset of resources. It's the same reason why we're also breaking out etcd and not having all three in the same, like it was originally with virtual cluster.
Yeah, I mean, you could program that state machine into a single custom resource pretty easily by just having two versions for different things. And then like, I mean, it just depends on like your rollout strategy. Like, if you only have one rollout strategy where you want all your API servers to upgrade beforehand, which is recommended to my understanding, then like the controller can just put in the status object that it's currently doing the API servers, and then it's going to move on to the controller manager afterwards. And that's almost easier to program against and make less error prone than trying to orchestrate that across multiple objects with some kind of like object ref.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of like, yeah, I mean, like in the Flux API, right, there's a valid reason why you would want like to separate Git repositories and like applies of those repositories, because you could restrict RBAC, you know, like for one or the other, and have feasibly two different people maintaining those things. But then like it adds complexity to have like multiple controllers, and like there's like eventing and object references and controlling the
The other thing is
clients
that we can
fetch between them. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. What about specifically from the add-ons perspective and the way that like KubeBuilder declarative project patterns has worked and things like that? Does it expose anything specific that would make us want to go one way or another?
I think the
Or is
other
it pretty-
thing you could do is like, yeah, you could still package them separately, but then just like use the libraries to load 2 packages and then use the same controller. I don't know if that's related exactly to what you're asking.
Yeah, I think that's kind of leading into what I was getting at. Go ahead, Justin.
I think that the way we've built KubeBuilder declarative pattern, it doesn't expect more than one source, like more than one manifest source, I think. That may be an easy change. I may be overlooking a trick. And so if you wanted to have a split version where API server went before Kube Controller Manager, that would imply 2 controllers, I believe. That's not to say you couldn't or shouldn't wrap them in over like a facade object called cluster or something, or virtual cluster that is able to orchestrate the subcontrollers. But yeah, the pattern certainly expects a single manifest version or a single manifest source per CR, I guess. So that would imply like more what you were saying at first. And yeah, I think it would be easier from that perspective. I don't know about packaging in multiple projects versus one. I know you want to do that for sort of organizational reasons. I think while it should work, I think that controller runtime, the structure of the KubeBuilder controller doesn't necessarily make it easy, especially if you wanted to reference each other. Like I think you'll end up merging them into one, but I don't think, like, it used to be easier in terms of like having each controller in its own directory. The real problem, I think, is going to be in the API directory, where you have them register into a scheme using a global variable. So it's going to be a little bit messy. I don't know how you would overcome that, and like, yeah, I don't know how that would work.
Is that harder to do now? Wow, that seems like it would be an oversight in design if that was harder to do than it used to be.
It's certainly harder on the controller side.
Are you specifically talking about like not supporting multi-group out of the box or multi-type out of the box? Or no, it's multi-group that it doesn't support out of the box, but that's just a feature that you turn on.
Yeah, I think that should still, you should still be able to create multiple controllers pretty easily with KubeBuilder, but I haven't done it with the V2 stuff.
You can certainly create them. I'm not aware of this option that you're talking about, Chris. It used to be that the controllers would all go in their nice separated directories, and so that made it very easy to like mix and match with. Now they're all in one controller directory. I don't know if you can override that. Is that what you were saying?
I think
yeah. So now after you generate your project,
go ahead. It's go ahead and talk about the multi-group option.
Yeah, so after you generate your project, you just do KubeBuilder edit -- multi-group true, and then it gives you a couple directions and says, move these into APIs versus API, and then move the controllers into controller, whatever the group name is, and then it auto-generates in those directories from there on out.
But you certainly could have a single group with multiple kinds as well, and that would fit your use case.
Yeah, because at least all the control plane components will be under control plane.cluster.x.case.io. It'll be when we switch over and do the infrastructure group to create the cluster version as well that we're going to be introducing that second group. So fun stuff. Okay, cool. This is helpful so far. If there's any thoughts that you all come up with, or like major learnings or pitfalls that you've run into or that come to you after this, hit me up in Slack. I'd love to hear more of those things before we fully embark on building out all 4 of these or 3 of these components. So,
one of the awkward limitations about this approach is that, like, since it's really about the least privilege RBAC that you would want to scope for the controller that applies all of the add-ons. So if you change the things like in the upstream channel, you need to make sure to keep that RBAC like up to date, or scope your changes like within the controller RBAC's limitations. So that's just something to consider. And then like Samtochi wrote the tool, you know, to generate like starter manifests based off of your bundles or based off of your packages for the controller RBAC. So that's like something that would be a maintenance concern. And if other people are trying to like extend those packages, like say they want to install something alongside their API server, this is like an area where that gets a little bit hard to install. You know, like there's not a technical limitation, but there's certainly a usability issue there that you may have to, you know, just deal with. Because yeah, if you've got like controller v1 like in the cluster, and then you added some object in that object, and then the controller doesn't have permission to like apply, you know, that package, then the cluster operator has to go in and like update the controller with new RBAC or something. So that's a component of that. I mean, if you give the, you know, like wider permission set, you know, then you'll have less of a chance of running into that problem, like using editor or admin or cluster admin, even depends on what you're doing. And then yeah, I do think that like having the sub object thing would work with the multiple controllers and multiple packages, but I would just caution against the complexity. So just make sure you know while you're doing it.
Cool.
And yeah, I think the RBAC thing shouldn't be that big of a problem, because the amount of extension and like changes in the objects that you're administering is probably pretty minimal. But so for virtual cluster, it's a pretty good use case in comparison to like something else that somebody wants to bolt on weird things like an ingress controller or cert manager or something. Yeah. Thanks for thanks for
thank you. I
together.
appreciate all the time. Yeah,
we don't have Jeff around to comment, but I'm sure that he would be quite excited to see this use case as well. Sweet.
I'll have to pop back in again sometime.
Yeah. Well, certainly we would want to see the demos, that's for sure here. Right? Cool. Justin, you have the next bullet, which is a pull request that I didn't look at yet.
Yes, thank you. So the next bullet is around, I don't think I put this on here, but it's around MVP YAML transformation helper. It's basically to serve the idea of creating manifests. This probably naturally comes after the next topic, but there's some work, there's some progress on the KOps integration. And as part of that, we will likely need to be manipulating YAML manifests from upstream to do things like splitting out RBAC, as we just talked about. And so I've started to create the tooling that I need in order to do that manipulation programmatically. If people are aware of better tooling that I could use instead, or other tooling that I could use instead, whether or not it's better, existence is probably better than not existing. So tooling that I could use instead or should be using instead, that would be wonderful to share. Otherwise, this is sort of Kubernetes aware YAML transforms. And we've started with one trivial one, which, because it's an MVP, which is basically just machinery up, which is just removing a label. But other ones that are sort of coming down the pipe are doing things like removing volumes, obviously adding labels, filtering so that we can filter out objects by kind, specifically to select or deselect the RBAC objects and basically split them into two packages. So yeah, if people have
another big one could be like finding all the services and changing them from like node ports to load balancers or something specific to your implementation, or downgrading them.
Yeah,
back down to services. Yeah.
those are yeah. So please, this uses a toolkit from Customize, which preserves YAML comments. So that's why the initial MVP is bigger than perhaps you might expect. But it's from here on in, it should then be smoother sailing. But if this is the wrong approach to use altogether, if there's some other tool for Kubernetes aware YAML manipulation, please let me know.
I now remember looking at this, I think one time when you, Samtochi, and I were working together. The intention here is that you have it being built as a binary, but it's also useful as a library, right?
It can be used as a library. I don't know if we want to encourage that, but yes, like we could start using these same
okay.
files, the same approaches to also do transforms inside our operators. So if you did want to remove a label, like we could have another, like you can already pipe through a pipeline, and we could make it, these can be plugged into that pipeline. I believe with not too much
somebody could say, open up their own channel and then like fork your manifests and use camel to like mutate them to their own use case.
That's more, yeah, that's more what I was imagining. That this is a tool for building a manifest from another manifest. So
and
like if
you could have like a make file with like a GitHub action that like updates it, based
exactly
on what's
right.
upstream.
So
that's cool.
Or you just run it manually and commit the output. And today it uses make and commands. I think we can also put this into Customize if that's like with the same, because the libraries come from Customize. I think we can actually plug this into Customize using some of their extensions.
Yeah, I think you can. You can either create a transformer or a generator, something along those lines. You can add it to your customization YAML.
Exactly. There's this.
Kept also can do similar things.
Yeah, I think they all share this library that is currently in Customize.
Yeah.
This is Nick. I just wanted to point out alternative tooling that could be useful here. I don't know if folks have heard about Q, but it lets you also like include schema validation as part of the data. So essentially, like everything has to shake out according to a certain schema that you've defined, and or else it like just won't evaluate at all. And I don't know if you could do like removal transformations with that, like removing a label or something, but just a note that it's another kind of like tool out there that has a reasonable amount of work in it.
I believe that I saw folks like Gareth and etc. talking about how to use Q to modify existing manifests, but I didn't look into it. Have you been able to use Q much, Nick?
I haven't used it for anything beyond like toy trivial things. So I don't want to lead people astray with this. Just want to point out that maybe it's something to look into.
If you want a use case, Ilya, I always pronounce his last name wrong, so I'm not going to try, that used to work with you, Lee. He has been doing a bunch of stuff with Q at on like, I think he was building an operator for GKE or something like that.
For Cilium, yeah. Cilium on GKE.
Yeah. And I believe that the back end he was mentioning to me that he was doing it all with Q. So.
And one of the handy things that's probably very attractive to somebody like Ilya is that Q is usable as a Go library directly. Cool. Well, I think honestly this patch is super uncontroversial for me. I think like there's certainly niche, for this tool to exist. Particularly since we need some ways that we can talk with each other about how to maintain manifests. So other than feedback directly in the patch, if you had any other concerns, Justin, that I'm pretty good to get this in.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. I think the primary thing was just to make sure there wasn't some other tool. I think I can certainly have a look at Q and what Ilya is doing. I'm just browsing around the docs. I don't see transforms highlighted. That doesn't mean it's not there. I just haven't found it yet. But yeah, then we can, if there's nothing else, then like that was the first thing, to figure out whether there was some other tool that I should be using. And thank you for that, Nick and Chris, that pointer.
I mean, beyond like using something more full-featured like Starlark or CDKs or JK-config, which all could import the YAML, and then you could use a programming language to mutate it. But those tools are, you would be writing up these transformations like by programming against the manifest. It would not be dissimilar from, like writing the Go code that you have in this library necessarily. It'd probably be more terse because they have a helper functs already available. But, and like there's a library in CDKs, so it would all be TypeScript, called CDKs Plus, which has this kind of intent-based like chaining style. So you can like get a defaulted container object with a single function call and then like template it with some optional arguments and add volume mounts and stuff with chained functions. And so that's like those tools are certainly capable of, taking an existing manifest and then transforming it and outputting new ones. But it's a wider, set of power or like like possible things that you can do. And so the interface is more complicated. It's more like programming. But if you want a place to write some transformers, like to operate on labels, filter RBAC, and I mean, you could probably implement that with like some TypeScript libraries, I suppose, and then just have like very small, CDKs or JK-config project that could fit that niche. But then you have it's not a pure Go dependency at that point. If you run JK-config, the V8 interpreter is embedded into the binary. So that's kind of nice because it's pretty self-contained. I don't know how CDKs uses it. I'm pretty sure that you just need a Node.js installation for that. But
just curious, are there no parsing libraries for Go, like we have regex and awk, etc., to substitute some of these labels, etc.?
It's a really, really good question. I think like what Justin's doing with the KYAML it's basically what you're talking about, except more structural. So it's not line-based like sed and awk. It's structural based off of like the keys that are inside of the parsed YAML. But it's just Go when you write it. It's just not very terse. It doesn't deal well with dynamic types, and there's all the error handling and interfaces and etc. And functional programming in Go looks really ugly as well. But yeah, there is a language that I think Google has some interest in maintaining called Starlark, as well that's good at this. It's like Pythonic, but it has a Go runtime. So that's like another way that you could add keys to objects and stuff.
Yeah, maybe somebody can look at Starlark if you say if it can be part of the Go, because these substitutions, generators, and all this in all the places which we have been seeing have to do with something parsing. And if there is something common parsing which can be exploited for the Go objects, that will be a real good thing to have.
It's certainly interesting to think about how the libraries that we're building here, we could fit them into other places, and including like our own operators. Like that's an interesting like pivot. I don't know if there's more that we should be doing than that.
Yeah, I think KML is definitely like a piece of the puzzle. It's like a powerful building block. But like the whole reason that you're writing this tool is that it's not high level enough for like a lot of the things that you would want to do. And it's maybe a bit tough. I almost think that some of these things would be easier from a functional programming perspective if we look at FP libraries for Go. Then a lot of those kinds of vector, map, dictionary, reduction, transforms are really like exactly the kind of thing that you want to do, but it's just a totally different programming model than iterating over things in a loop and stuff. So sometimes the ideas for operating on these kinds of nested collections could be more concise. Yeah, it's also not clear to me. I guess Skylark might be the Go version of Starlark.
I think there was some naming debacle, and so the name was changed. So Starlark is now Skylark. And it does have implementations in Go, Java, and I believe Rust, the future language for all of us.
Yeah. I'm excited for when we port Kubernetes to Rust. It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be super awesome.
The cool thing about it is we'll get back to the intimate days of early Kubernetes when only 50 people or so knew how to actually contribute to it. And then we'll have less feature bloat. Yeah, the feature bloat will be in the language itself instead of in the project. So seems like you knew a little bit about Skylark already. Did you have an opinion on using it for these kinds of transformations, Justin?
I did debate. So the KYAML library is the one that keeps the comments and basically preserves the structure, which I wanted to keep using.
Good point.
I did debate wrapping the KYAML library in Skylark and then exposing it to effectively Skylark scripts. That was more. That would be even more work. So
just so I understand, you debated modifying Skylark to use KYAML internally.
Well, Skylark is very, very extensible. And actually, like
to me,
it almost does nothing out of the box. Like out of the box, Skylark is just a very sandboxed Python environment or Python style environment with very limited abilities to do things by design. And to make it do anything, you plug in extension objects. And I know that like Cruise and Stripe created SkyConfig and Isopod, I believe, which are Kubernetes extensions for Skylark. And Bazel uses Skylark and extends it with their own objects for building stuff. But yeah, so the way it would, the most natural way it would work is either use isopod and sky config and basically not worry about preserving comments, or bring across, put the KYAML library, expose the KYAML library to Skylark and write these things in Skylark. I felt like this was a better way to start. The KYAML library is actually fairly complicated to use. If you look at the code, you'll be like, it's surprising. You basically have to manipulate YAML like not even a DOM tree, more like I'm trying to remember what was before the DOM. Like there's
AST?
yeah, more like an AST,
Mhm.
or more like a token stream than a slightly minimally parsed token stream in order to.
Oh wow, yeah, that's pretty like a almost like a BNF grammar output.
Yes, exactly. That's
that's pretty hard to use. Okay. Yeah, well, in that case, I mean, I guess one idea that could come out of this conversation is like, if you have sky config and isopod, what is the kind of like high level interface that those things are producing, and how can we take bits and pieces of that interface and do something similar in KYAML or on top of KYAML? Then if we have CAML right now for messing around with that interface and producing something useful, it doesn't prevent us from graduating to, you know, using those exact same libraries in some other interface later on. And,
yeah,
that sounds good to me. Sweet. Any more comments on that? Just speak up about it. Daniel, was this bullet point in here from like last time or something? I did make this cool repo that you should all look at if you have some time. But, yeah.
No, I think it's. I can't remember that you showed this the last time. I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for throwing it on there if you did. I made a repository called CappyFlux demo. I guess I'll just share my screen. I don't know if I mentioned this before. Oh, I guess screen sharing is disabled. My bad. But yeah, the link's in the thing. And this is just an example of how to bootstrap multiple clusters with Cluster API using Flux. And you could see this creating some pretty complex emergent behavior for like managing things from day zero with Git, GitOps, and add-ons. Those add-ons could be add-on operators using the declarative pattern, which could also be, you know, sorting their packages from OCI registries or Git or some channel. And yeah, I'm finding that there's not a lot of like really open examples of multi-cluster stuff that actually is useful. So if you have other things that are leveraging Cluster API and are able to bootstrap multiple clusters and get them to a useful state immediately, you know, feel free to mention those demos here. I guess we could also probably share that kind of work and how it cross-cuts with cluster add-on stuff directly in the Cluster API call. This is basically using Flux as an alternative to something called the oh, I can't remember what it's called anymore. It's too many words in my brain. But there's an experimental feature inside of the Cluster API controllers that's able to basically apply a bundle of manifests, and this is an alternative approach to that. Yeah.
Cluster resource set is, I think, what you're looking
Cluster
for.
resource set, that's what it is. So yeah, possible to use other things from the, you know, community to accomplish similar results. And this relates to our group in that the bootstrap flow would work for, getting declarative pattern operators running and that kind of thing. Cool. Feel free to ask me any questions about that. Justin, do you want to talk about the COP stuff?
Thank you. Sure. There is, I feel like after many months of not making a lot of progress on CAPS integration, I have made a little bit more progress on and got some things into place. The PR into KOps now have been updated with the minimal RBAC permissions based on some Toshi's work. So basically like pre-creating the RBAC permissions in alongside the operator. Trickly, should have been trickle. And so there are a bunch of those sort of PRs. I think we are in a much better place security-wise, sort of overcoming some of the KOps KOps maintainers' objections to the approach. And so that is great. Thank you, Toshi, for that work. And then there's what I think is a more exciting one, which is the other big objection was some people, or quite rightly, some people want to have a clear understanding of what the operator or what is going to be installed onto their cluster. And the operator, because of its indirection, sort of makes that harder to understand. Certainly compared to the status quo today, where the manifests are basically hard-coded into the KOps binary. And so therefore we are able to tell you exactly what it's going to be. The flip side of that is it's every time we want to change one of those manifests, we have to release a new version of KOps, which is a pain. And it's, coupling of versions, all sorts of problems of that nature. So we want the operators and their separate release cycles, but we still want the ability to understand exactly what the operator is going to produce. And what this second linked PR does is it runs the operator client side in what I think we've previously called it one-shot mode, that basically produces the YAML on standard out that it would apply. And so the KOps binary is able basically it has to run a Docker container, but it is able to like expand out an operator that it has sourced from the web or your private registry or whatever it is. And there is a trick which I was quite proud of, which is so obviously on your standard in, you pass the CR, the instance of the CRD that you want the operator to expand. You can also pass other objects. And the use case for that is, for example, the core DNS operator, which is the one I've been playing with, looks up the IP address to use for the kubedns service from, I think currently it uses like the Kubernetes default service, the Kubernetes, the service, that's confusing, the service named Kubernetes in the default namespace. And it does that to get the CIDR, to infer the CIDR range for services. So what you can do is you can pass additional objects on standard in, and then the operator, we run the operator in a special sort of sandboxed mode where it's able to see those objects as if they were coming from an API server. So this is that second or last link. And so the KOps or kubeadm or whatever.
Did you do that by replacing the client with a mock client?
Yes, we actually had a mock.
Very cool.
Exactly. We had a mock client, and so I took the mock client and copied and pasted it and tweaked it a little bit for our use cases to be less test oriented and more like different, like real oriented. And so it mocks out the API server or the client, runs it. And so the idea is this way we actually have a way to pass variables or state into these operators.
Dependent objects, basically.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, like this is the custom resource you're passing. This is like the state of the certain cluster objects. And then when you run the operator in the one-shot mode, you're like, hey, here's the result of your reconcile loop.
Exactly. And you can
That's
pass
nuts, Justin. That's so cool.
But you can also pass as many, you can only overpass objects, right? So the question is how would KOps or kubeadm know what objects to pass? I imagine we will basically build up a set of objects that we need to pass, and we'll just pass them to all the operators, and who cares? Like, we're going to stream an extra couple of kilobytes over standard in. No big deal.
So we could have a package called like standard cluster info or something, that then people can write their operators against.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't exactly. We haven't. I mean, you don't even need to. Yes, we have. So I think actually Satoshi. Sorry, I'm just like rambling. I think Satoshi identified some patterns from the core DNS operator and refactored those out into a package. In other words, to discover the cluster site or discover the kubedns IP address, service IP address. And so those I think will be a Go package which operators can use, and will eventually discover a set of objects which a cluster administration tool should pass in. So like today it passes, or the project passes in the kubedns service and the Kubernetes service. But if we have others, then we can pass those in. Like I know some things use the UUID of the kube system namespace. That's a trickier one because that you don't know in advance. But we need to figure out what those objects are and basically just stream them in. But yeah, hopefully, I'm hoping that unblocks us on the KOps side, because I think those two things will hopefully overcome the main objections. The third objection is around running images and how we mirror images. That should become not like the second client-side expansion should overcome that objection as well, because it's uses the same mechanism that we always use. So KOps has a nascent image mirroring solution, and so as long as it happens client-side, it'll plug into that. The problem is if it's an operator, then the KOps client-side mirroring can't see the second image. It can only see.
I see what you're talking about now. Okay, so yeah, it would need to, and this is also sort of a dry run for your operator as well to check that it would work in your environment.
Yes, well, so the way we've, I think I actually called it dry run, amusingly.
Yeah.
The way KOps is consuming that dry run output is we then do not run the operator. So it is a mode. It is an additional mode for people that, for whatever reason, don't want to run operators. And I think we can slice that in a more acceptable way, like pre-create the manifests and run the operator and have it adopt it. But this is a starting point that I think will get us able to merge, I hope.
You certainly could, for like things that can't be known ahead of time, like the UUID of the kube system namespace, which you could certainly generate and inject yourself. I'm not sure how recommended that would be, but you could run them in a non-dry mode from the client side, accessing the API server directly from your machine. That could be one way to accomplish that. But
yes.
The only other way I can see it happening is like you actually run the operator in one-shot mode as a job, and then they get cleaned up afterwards inside the cluster. And I feel like that's the cleanest way to do it, because you can't assume that the client has network access to everything the cluster does.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've been, we need to find a path to get it integrated, and then I think we can start to
think about those more minimal operating modes afterwards.
Different modes.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, the manifest expansion thing in the dry run mode on the client just certainly allows that image mirroring to be possible. That's pretty cool. Okay. Because that was the third kind of snafu.
Yeah, and we also know that, like, some people aren't wild about the idea of operators. I think the nice thing is we essentially say, even if you have users that aren't wild about operators, you can write an operator using the kubectl declarative pattern, and you can still meet their needs as well by just following this pattern.
Yeah, we're running into some similar issues with like like the Flux installation and Bootstrap subcommands of the Flux command line tool. which uses a little bit of customized internally, but also like builds abstractions on top of it. And people are like, I don't want this magic thing. And we're like, hey, but it's idempotent. And they're like, but I don't want this magic thing. And then now we have a Terraform provider, and now we have people who are using the customization, raw and all kinds of other things. Folks with lots of different opinions on how to manage their manifests. I guess that's just the world that we're in. It's our future. Cool. Okay, cool. Thanks for talking through those things. We are almost at time. Does anyone else have any comments or concerns or questions on the COPS stuff? Cool. I guess the last thing I wanted to mention, oh yeah, what's up?
Oh, I just wanted to ask, since we got that KEP merged for bundles, is one of the next steps for that to kind of like apply or have COPS be able to apply a version or schema of said bundles for add-ons?
I feel like the bundle is, for the COPS approach, it's more inside the controller. So if we were to update Kubernetes declarative pattern to be able to source manifest bundles from OCI registries, then that would be in a free integration. You wouldn't have to do any work.
That's true. I think there are two places I think where, so yes, there are also two places where your work, that KEP work applies here. The first one of which is we need some way of knowing whether an operator supports dry run mode and how we would invoke it. So I was imagining using your same approach of using labels to identify that it does support it. And then I think another thing we could do is we could say, this operator is actually fairly trivial and you don't need to execute it. And you can actually just go and take the underlying manifest. So if we had this sort of bypass approach, you could mark it as safe for bypass or in some way. And then the tool.
Are you talking about OCI labels for that, Justin?
Yes.
Or are you, okay, so OCI labels, and you're going to actually package the operators and themselves.
Well, we have to package the, yeah. So the operators. So today the KEPS integration runs the operator directly and magically knows the name of the image, that it has to pass the dry run flag, that it can pass the dry run flag, and that it has to run the operator and can't just go and get the underlying manifest directly. It would be great to be able to just get the underlying manifest directly and skip running Docker from a performance and like dependency point of view. But in any case, we still need to know what how to get dry run output out.
So we could use OCI registry client libraries inside of COPS, KOPS, to then talk to the registry, open up the manifest bundle for the operator itself, and then examine the OCI labels. So basically exactly what Nick was talking about, which is a direct client integration as well for packaging the operators themselves instead of something bespoke.
Yes, but I mean,
Cool.
I think the first step is to get into Kubernetes declarative pattern as another source, and
so that's the two places basically, at runtime and at install time.
Exactly.
Cool. The runtime part will come for free as long as we update the declarative pattern libraries, and the install time stuff will have to just be refactoring of the bespoke stuff inside of KOPS. Cool.
Okay, cool. That's what I want to get out of it. I'm trying to like figure out how to help, and it's kind of hard to wade through all of the different angles we're working at right now. Having not been following super closely.
Probably, I guess, immediate action items for helping there, since we all think that the KEP is good, is make which OCI labels to use concrete and document that, and then add support for a source into declarative pattern, since we have full control over that. So if we have the labels and then we add the source to declarative pattern, then that's already two things that can happen like right now that we can do code reviews and things on.
Cool,
I-
awesome.
I agree.
So I'll work on concreting those OCI labels for our players.
And maybe the
though
client library approach for that, that kind of thing.
Yeah, what may be different is where the place where it may diverge for cops is that the labels that tell cops whether it needs to dry run the operators don't necessarily need to be in the the cube builder declarative stuff doesn't really need to know about that. Correct or incorrect?
I guess, yeah, I guess not. But
Like,
just
that could
adding
just be
support
like-
for the source. I think those are two separate tasks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could get started on the source support for declarative pattern without worrying about the OCI label thing if you wanted.
Sweet.
Yeah. Cool. Last quick point, so we don't go over too much, is I've been talking with the other maintainer that we have from StorageOS for the Ignite micro VM project. And Sunny is working on libraries that encourage a more or a less error-prone programming model for controller reconcilers. So just the stuff is public and open. It's not super ready to show yet, but after doing some code reviews, it's looking super promising. We're going to be putting an example together. This just relates to writing controllers that are not buggy. So,
Is there any way we can follow along with that work?
I'll probably come back with the next update for that. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Super awesome discussions today. Appreciate all of the PRs, presentations, and etc. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you later.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. See you.